Hi, it's Steve, and I am here with Jonathan Zachreson. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
It is my privilege. So, I'm interviewing you as a freedom fighter for the Gallery of Freedom Fighters. So, let's start this way. Let me ask you, please explain to us why you are fighting for freedom.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's an honor to be in that category of freedom fighter. For me, I guess when I see something wrong, especially when it's impacting my kids and other kids, I just couldn't be quiet, and I can't be quiet about it. And so that's been my personality my whole life. I don't really think, for better or for worse, I really don't think about maybe the personal consequences that might come to me. But I definitely, just I see something that's wrong, and I want to stand up and do what I can to make it better.
So, you were born to stand up, you were born to take it. It's in your
Maybe,
genes.
maybe, yeah, maybe. I might be the only one, and maybe I'm wrong, but I don't have a problem standing alone if I have to.
Did you come from a family where people took an active role in their community on different issues?
I had a very modest childhood growing up in the Sacramento area of California. Um, I'm the oldest child, so maybe it has something to do with that. I'm not sure, uh, but no, I'm not. Everything was pretty much average growing up.
Tell us a little bit about what you're doing now and why you're doing it.
Okay, yeah, sure. So about what, gosh, three and a half years ago now, we got word of this thing called COVID that was impacting this country, and it was impacting schools in particular. And I have three kids now. At the time, I had two kids in high school. One was a foster child, and then we had another kid in middle school. And the school shut down. And I was like, why is this? This is weird. This doesn't make sense. And I was kind of frustrated about it. But 2 weeks into that, they sent another email that said schools were going to be closed for about a month and a half after that. And I was mad. I was like, this is not okay. My kids are not learning. This is a mess. This is something that we don't do for anything else. And so I started reaching out to local representatives that I had never heard of, right? I just knew that there were school board members. I knew I had elected representatives at the state level, and started reaching out. Now, where I'm at, thankfully, there's a lot of very sympathetic board members and representatives uh, that represented me, but they didn't have the power in California. And so they led me to the county, which ultimately led me to the state, and realized that it was our governor that was calling the shots and basically telling schools that they had to close. So I started, when I realized that was, we're talking about now June of 2020. I founded Reopen California Schools to try to connect other parents across the state to have a rally at the Capitol. And I thought, if Governor Newsom just saw a lot of people show up at the Capitol for this rally, he would listen to us, and he would give us an opportunity for us to go to school, for our kids to go to school. And boy, was I wrong about that. But yeah, so it continued to go on and on in California. California was one of the worst states. We're the last state to reopen schools, have the least amount of in-person days out of any other state in the nation in 2021. And or the 2020-2021 school year. Some schools were closed the entire year. And so, yeah, I got together, part of a group that sued the governor over that. Then after schools finally did open, we had a lot of the uh, uh, complicated, distracting quarantine rules that essentially shut schools down or shut classrooms down because of it. And they had mask mandates that we just knew that that wasn't working for kids. It wasn't good for kids. So we fought those. And then after that kind of happened, we had the COVID vaccine mandates at schools for every age group. And we successfully fought that through all the same organizations. We had to sue school districts. We had rallies. We had 4,000 people at the Capitol. And I would tell you that rally, by the time we got to that point, and I think that was October of 21, but by the time we got to that point, I think that Newsom was paying attention. There was a Capitol police officer there that does the security. He told me he has never seen anything like it. So that the passion around some of those mandates when you go after our kids is quite a bit. And parents that maybe weren't there for the reopening were definitely there for that mandate. They did not want that to happen. And so Newsom ultimately quietly rescinded that. But a lot of parents are now involved. A lot of these groups are involved, paying attention to these bills that come through our state legislature. And so we just stay connected, and we're working to fight those and hopefully introduce some good positive bills in California to impact our kids positively.
In 3 minutes, you've painted a picture of a dramatic victory for the people. Um, what were the top challenges in doing this for you? I mean, did you have the time, or has it?
I mean, it's pretty much depending on which week it is. It can be like a second job. We work in the evenings, taking calls when you can. But no, I work full time, and that's what pays the bills. And this advocacy that I do is volunteer effort to get it done. But thankfully, we have a lot of connections and a lot of groups, so the work is spread out at this point. I would say the biggest challenge, especially early on, was not knowing how the system worked or who to contact, or what was the method of getting things done. Um, you know, Oftentimes there's a lot of the secret power poles, or hidden, I guess I would say, hidden power poles in government, and you don't really know who's calling the shots, or what it is. You think that a school board has a lot of autonomy to make decisions, right? You just can go to the school board. Well, that's not really the case. California dictates a lot what those school board members can do and what the school district can do. And even if the state legislature doesn't, there's a power system in California that essentially creates an illusion of power and forces school districts to do things that necessarily aren't law, but has an illusion of that it's the law. And so school districts just comply to avoid being in the spotlight, or avoid having the ire of the state come down on them.
And have you come to view the state as an enemy, or exactly how do you view the state here?
Gosh, well, I mean, I guess broadly, I mean, government is agnostic, right? I'm agnostic toward that. However, it can, the more power that you have in government, especially when you have an imbalance of power, like we do in California, where we pretty much have a single party rule. Governor's Democrat, the legislature is more than almost 3/4 Democrat here. Every statewide elected representative is, and so the Republicans here don't have much power. I mean, we've had some good, PR wins lately. We've had some organization pieces like coming out, like we're talking about, and especially when we focus on issues that have broad appeal. But yeah, in California, there's a progressive wing of the Democrat Party that doesn't represent the values of most Californians, but they ultimately run the show here in California. And so when you look at it from that light, and the power and politics at play and the bullying that happens, I definitely see it in a negative light. I wish we had some more balance. I wish we had more people, in local government willing to take a stand, even if it meant that you had to take a few arrows, because that's ultimately where we see change is one person stands up first, and then you have the courage of other people to stand up second and third, fourth, and it's a lot easier than for the rest of those folks to stand up behind them.
I get that. It does make sense. You did remark about the bullying. For many people, that's a deterrent. It sounds like the bullying is not a deterrent to you. You just have the ability to shrug it off, or are there techniques to deal with it?
Yeah, for me personally, in many cases, it energizes me. So I get really focused on it. So I mean, that could be good or bad, right? Depending if I need to focus on something else, but I'll get really focused on addressing that issue, and trying to respond to that, whether it's through social media, whether it's through to groups, but I learn from it, right? So I learn how they use it, I learn their tactics, and that way I'm in a better position next time to either deal with it or prevent it, whether it's a PR battle that's going on, or whether they're calling someone names. At this point we just don't care. Like, people can call me all sorts of names and I just don't care. And in some ways, because you don't care, it kind of stops, right? If you respond to it and cower, they know it works, and so they'll keep going and they'll try it again. But when they realize it doesn't work on you, they have nothing left, and so it just stops.
That's very encouraging. Who are the people that are typically getting involved? Are they young parents like yourself, or do you find like a cross section of the population, older people as well?
It's a mix, for sure, depending on the aspect and what group. I mean, where I'm at, there's actually a large 55 plus community that's very active in politics that supported school board candidates. So they were very happy to be involved. But yeah, when we're talking about the organizing at the Capitol or the other volunteer works of advocacy, it's generally parents. I mean, that's who it is. It's parents, in their 30s, 40s, generally, that are fighting this fight, because they have skin in the game, right? They have kids in the school system. They have young kids in California. They don't want to leave, and so they're putting their resources, their skills, their professional skills, their time into trying to have change and fight back in California.
Um, is there a consensus on what the end game is?
That's a great question. I would say that it's different for everybody. Right? They have different goals. I would say that in the whole cycle of reopening schools, the mask debate, the vaccine COVID mandate debate, now there are some curriculum issues that still are out there. But then we have a lot of the transgender things going on in schools that certain parents are upset with. And so I think it varies. And every point of the way I've seen you gain people and you lose people, right? So someone was really important about, is really advocating for schools to open, but a small percentage of those people also wanted masks on kids. So they kind of fell off and it went to a different avenue. Then you had different people that didn't really know how to fight it, just thought schools were closed. But then as soon as they, maybe they could successfully deal with kids being at home, maybe it wasn't as much of an impact because they had family that could help out. But then when kids were going back to school, they had to be forced masked. And so they were upset about that. And then you had a whole other people that's all right, it's just a mask, whatever. But then, oh, now you want to inject an experimental, vaccine into my child. That's only that now we know what, for kids was not, it was not the wise thing to do. Anyway, so yeah, those group of people kind of step in and say, we want to do something. And then, there's a bunch of people on that side. And then, well, maybe they feel differently about some of the transgender youth things that are going on in schools and the curriculum, so they kind of fall off and you have a different group of people come in. So each issue seems to have a different one. For me personally, I feel like I want to bring back a balance of power in California so that we don't have this top-down approach and that parents really can have more of a say and involvement in some of the decisions around their kids' lives, in particular in education. And that just generally our legislature just functions better by giving more input from balanced viewpoints, and that good bills can be heard and bad bills can be shot down, but don't abuse your political power to block good bills simply because they're popular, but they're not popular with your base. And so we need to change that in California to have better governance. So for me, that's probably the end goal of all of it.
That makes sense. The folks that are abusing power and preventing that balance, what have you learned to be their motivation? Is it just that they like having power and they don't want to get rid of it? They don't want to share it?
Oh, that's a good question. In California, politics are interesting, and I'm sure it's similar in other states. But you have your the way that a lot of politics are funded, right, or through finances, and a lot of the money comes from organizations. And those organizations, depending on what they are, they have this cabal. The way to describe it is they basically get money from corporations to support a cause, and then they use that money to give to candidates. And so it's kind of consolidating finances to help get certain people elected. And if you're a candidate and $50,000 of $50 to $100,000 of your race and is coming from these groups, in some ways, if that's all it takes to win, because the population votes based off what mailer they get, or they look at R versus D. So the California Democratic Party really likes to bash the National Republican Party, so that way voters will continue to vote Democrat in California, even though on a local level the Democrat's the worst candidate for you. But yeah, they'll do that. And so really, but they have to appease their base and their donors is what I see as part of the problem. And so until we get to a point where we can help expose the issues more, and get those issues out there so people can see what's going on, and then change and kind of force the hand so that we're talking about topics and issues, as opposed to this nonsense of just, Democrat versus Republican. Once we get to that point, we'll make a difference. And so I think, like I said, bringing up using different tools and strategies to bring those issues to the front, I think has been useful. Social media has been helpful in that regard. I think in California, we went through something where the Democrats wanted to block a bill. It's called SB 14. It was authored by a Republican. It went through our state Senate just fine. And this bill essentially requires, it would label sex trafficking of a minor as a serious felony. So why it wasn't one in California already is absurd, but nonetheless, the Democrats on the safety committee of all places in the assembly blocked it. And there's an uproar about this. I mean, even the journalists who feel like, they have to be careful what they say, because again, goes to the power structure. If they upset a Democrat too much in an article, they don't get press privileges and they don't get to write stories. So you can't upset the party in power, or else, too much. But even they were like just appalled and aghast, and it was incredible, because pretty much no one wanted that to fail. Everyone was for it. Well, they're so embarrassed with that story, with them blocking it, that they had to have a special hearing in the assembly to go back and rehear it in committee so that it can move forward in the progress on there. And even our governor was asked about it and made a positive comment about it. So, you take these issues that are common sense, that most people support, and basically force the hand of the people in power to basically pick which side. Are you on the side of, criminals, or are you on the side of victims? And if they pick the victims, which they've been doing secretly for a while, then you can, blast them for it and embarrass them for it. And hopefully they don't make that mistake again, and you can get some change that way.
I get what you're saying, and I understand your point about you follow the money, and people are choosing profit over principle. However, I'm not sure that explains why people would support policies that hurt children, that traffic children, and even the trans stuff, where that could permanently impair a child. Have you found another motivation besides just follow the money for people supporting clearly harmful bills and policies?
Well, there probably are we do have a lot of activists in our state legislature, for sure. So those people, are on the same side as the folks that are funneling the money, and they're happy to do, they would go farther if they could, right? And then you have more moderate voices that are more follow the money and maybe pay attention more to business interests. And so it's this constant compromise from all sorts of issues that they're doing this. And so the more people are paying attention, the less they can push through some of these bad bills that hurt kids. But they did it for years, and really there just wasn't as much attention on it, especially when it comes to a lot of the transgender youth bills, just because it was not as common. So they passed it, and like no one knew that, no one was affected by it. And now all of a sudden we have the social contagion, and it's really out in the forefront here in California and across the nation, and we're seeing it. So finally we have to kind of take a step back. And most Californians agree that we need to take a step back, but our legislature isn't going to do that unless they're forced to.
I've heard other people that I've had this discussion with express feelings of moral revulsion at the actions of the activists that you're mentioning. I mean, there are people who are committed to a certain ideology that is destructive. Do you also feel a certain moral revulsion when you come across those people that are hardcore advocates of harming kids?
I mean, depending on the issue, yeah. I can understand why, not necessarily the means, but I understand why a lot of people in California thought, we should be masking kids, right? They masked themselves. The interesting part is that changed when people started seeing the adults, the politicians, not mask, not follow their own rules, but then tell us we had to mask kids. And I think that started upsetting a lot of people, right? A lot of people trusted the governor. A lot of people trusted these health officials until they saw them being hypocrites. And so I do think a lot of people follow along, but do try to do the right thing. And I think generally when people talk about the maybe less when it comes to say some of the transgender policies, right? They believe that that kids are born in the wrong body and they just need help to make them feel better in their wrong body. Now, I disagree with that assertion, but maybe some people feel that way because that's what they were taught. But then when you start to go into this part where we're not going to let kids go through puberty, and we're going to sterilize them, and we're going to convince kids that they need to chop off their genitals, that's when the part just it's absurd and scary, and it's disgusting. And you really wonder what drives that piece. And I think that those are people who either don't have kids, so they don't understand the issue, or they're frankly evil, right? Want to make a profit off of abusing kids, and they're going to make a profit as long as they can until the government doesn't let them anymore.
So in the final analysis, it's the government who's going to have the responsibility of stopping the evil people.
I would not say it's the government. It's going to be the people. The people have the responsibility. Government, like I said, it can be abused. It can be helpful depending on how it's done. But it's going to be us people who then force our government to be on our side.
Through voting in the right people, and
through voting, through activism, through volunteering, through it's very important in any kind of political campaign for the right people. You have to put the effort. Your vote is good, but if you really want to make a difference, volunteer, donate. Those two things go a long way.
Let's suppose that you were speaking in an auditorium with 500 parents who were aware of your efforts, appreciated your efforts, understood what you're doing and why. And one of them stood up and said, Jonathan, I get what you're saying. I see the importance of what you're saying. I see how you've been able to get other people to step up. I feel like stepping up, but frankly, I'm scared. What would you say to that person to encourage them to get involved, at least take one step?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I know everyone's circumstance is different. For me, it's just, I think, just do something. Right. So just do something. I didn't know what to do 3.5 years ago. I didn't know where this was going. I mean, it would be crazy to tell you that I was, leading a statewide effort or getting endorsements for my school board race from, congressional candidates, holding press conference with assembly members. We haven't talked about this yet, but we're going to be pushing forward 3 statewide initiatives. I would never thought to do this. And so you learn as you go along. And to me, it was just do something. And for me, that conversation did come up with my wife. It's like, what happens if, I work for a healthcare company, I'm speaking out against COVID policies, right? And so, the thought is, well, what happens if they try to go after and try to get me fired? Now, thankfully, that never happened, at least if it did a little bit, but it didn't go anywhere for those who tried. So what would happen if I did, right? Well, one, I guess we were in a position, my wife and I, where if that happened, we'd be okay. But for me, I'm like, we'll come try it. I was like, come at me. It was kind of my attitude. Just because that I would be able to weather that storm. And I just know that, thankfully in California, we actually have some protections for employees to be able to have civic engagement, speak out. And so as the laws were written years ago, I think in the 1930s, but they exist nonetheless. If you're employed and you're civically engaged and politically engaged, you have some protections. And so to me, I always go back to that. At some point, I got good at the PR stuff, and I figured, well, if that were to happen, it wouldn't be good from a PR perspective from anyone who fired me. And so I just wasn't too worried at that point. And I'll just take that too. I don't know if we can talk a little bit about the personal experience that I just recently helped a mom. So she was a real estate agent in Benicia. And what happened is she spoke at a school board meeting, upset about the sex ed curriculum, in particular around the transgender stuff being taught to kids at a really young age. So telling 10-year-olds that they can choose their gender and things like that. So she was very well-mannered, very well-spoken, did a good job, represents probably what a majority of moms and parents feel in this country. Now, could the school district do anything, or would they? That's beside the point. The school district was benign here. They weren't involved. They just listened, nodded their heads. But then a progressive Democrat group, well, they call themselves progressives, in her area said, this is not okay. She's hateful. She's a bigot. Started calling her all sorts of names. We're going to publish an op-ed about her. Went to a person that was part of that organization, went to her employer, or I guess her contractor, and said, hey, do you really agree with this person? This person's a Nazi. This person's a bigot. Look at what they said at the school board meeting. We're going to publish a story, and if you don't give us, if you don't, if she basically telling if she's part of your organization by this time, we're publishing a story, and we're going to associate you with all of her hate. And sure enough, by that deadline, they terminated her contract with her, and so she tried the legal avenue, but unfortunately, because she really couldn't go after those who got her fired, the way the laws are written here in California. And because she's an independent contractor, she didn't have very much legal recourse to go after or it'd be a very difficult case to go after the real estate firm. And so she decided after a few months of doing that, just to go public with it, put a video together of her story, and it now has 5 million views on Twitter. And this just happened yesterday. And so a lot of media folks are wanting to reach out because frankly, people are outraged. They're like, look, you don't have to agree with this mom's opinion to recognize that she should have the right to speak at a school board meeting, talk about curriculum, whether she agreed with it or disagreed with it, and not fear that she's going to lose her livelihood. And thankfully for her, she was able to find another broker a little bit outside of her area. And what's interesting is now there's all these people that say that if they're going to get a real estate agent, they want her to be her agent.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, it hurt her for a few months, but I think it's going to help her out in the long run.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
You've been very good with answers and very kind with your thoughts. Let's finish up with this. What haven't I asked you that I should have, that we need to know?
Yeah, well, I think there's some big things in the works here coming in California. So I told you about all the organization. We sued the governor. We did all these things to get schools open, and we've been very well organized. We've made a lot of connections throughout the state. We're taking that organization and we're fighting back to, like I said, to make sure we have positive bills move forward. And so in California, we have this initiative process that voters can bring those initiatives if you get enough signatures. And so we're bringing forward, we're coming to a group called Protect Kids California, and we're going to be submitting 3 ballot initiatives to the Secretary of State to try to make it on the November 2024 election. And these ballot initiatives would the first one would require that schools notify parents if their kid wants to be treated as transgender at school. So that way we can get the parents involved as soon as possible and get the kid the help that they need. The second one is to protect girls' sports and spaces. Is to make sure that, I have a daughter that plays softball, when they're playing sports, that they have a fair shot and they're not competing against biological boys. And I certainly don't want her having to change or shower in front of a biological boy. And it goes both ways, right? So we want to protect their spaces and the sports. And the last one is to prevent the sterilization of kids. What's going on in this country and in California is just devastating. And parents are given false choices. They're basically says, you let your kid do this, or they're going to commit suicide. Or, if you don't let your kid do this, we are going to take custody of your kid and they'll go into the foster system. And so we really need to stop that. And frankly, we see more and more cases of regret, especially as younger and younger kids are partaking in these surgeries and hormones. And so we prohibit the use of puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, vasectomies, genital surgeries, for minors. I mean, adults can do what they want to do with their bodies, but leave the kids alone. And so we'll start collecting signatures for that at the beginning of November. We'll have 6 months to get 550,000 valid signatures. And then if we do that, it will be on the November 2024 ballot. And that will be amazing if we do it, because these issues are actually popular with California voters. The polling data we have suggests 2 to 1, 3 to 1, these issues will win. It's pretty insane how popular it is, even amongst Democrats. Actually, it's not insane, right? It's very common sense issues. It's insane that there's actually any support or any opposition to these issues. Sadly, those people are the ones running the show in Sacramento here in California. And these issues I think will change the trajectory in California and in the nation if we can get them on the ballot and ultimately passed in November 24.
Well, Jonathan, it's a remarkable story. And what's interesting is that you haven't mentioned the word optimism once, but you're really optimistic. And it is just comes across. And I have to tell you that that has a very big impact on people. Um, they don't need to be told how to feel. They could feel how you feel, and that's going to be contagious. As they say, consciousness is contagious. And you're really spreading a very dynamic consciousness. And you certainly are an inspiration from somebody who's gone from the bench to not just the field, but to the management of the team. So I salute you and I thank you so much. You've been very gracious with your time and your thoughts. Thank you so much.
Thank you.